Most players believe balanced discussions are about truth, about accuracy, and about fairness. They aren't. Balanced discussions are about positioning, not just in the game, but in identity, status, responsibility, and perception. That doesn't make them dishonest by default, it makes them human. Competitive environments don't just test execution, they test how people explain outcomes to others and to themselves. And nowhere is that more visible than in how players talk about their characters. On the surface, balanced talk looks analytical. Frame data, tier lists, matchup numbers, patch notes, win rates. It feels technical, measured, objective, but underneath that structure is a simpler reality. Most players cannot independently evaluate character strength in isolation. They experience strength through outcomes, not systems. Through wins and losses, through frustration, through effort spent versus reward gained. So when players argue about balance, they aren't debating data, they're negotiating meaning. What does this win say about me? What does this loss say about me? What does my character choice say about my skill? Balance becomes the language people use to answer those questions. Fighting games are uniquely hostile to clean evaluation. Too many variables overlap at once. Skill differences, matchup familiarity, execution consistency, mental state, risk tolerance, offline versus online conditions. Because of this, uncertainty is constant, and humans do not sit comfortably with uncertainty. When people can't measure something directly, they borrow certainty from somewhere else. From confident voices, from winning players, from popular opinions, from explanations that sound technical enough to trust. This is why balanced narratives spread faster than balanced truths. They reduce ambiguity. They stabilize perception. They make outcomes feel explainable. That's not ignorance, it's adaptation. Downplaying is often framed as dishonesty. Most of the time it isn't. It's identity protection. When a player wins with a character perceived as weak, the win feels earned, hard fought, personal. Downplaying keeps the credit attached to the player instead of the tool. If this character is bad, then my success must come from my skill. The narrative is powerful. It preserves self-image, it reinforces competence, it creates insulation. If the character is weak, losses feel understandable, wins feel impressive, inconsistency feels forgivable. Downplay isn't about lying, it's about controlling attribution. Difficulty as social value. Players don't just want to win, they want wins to mean more. So characters framed as honest, demanding, limited, underpowered become symbols of mastery. Difficulty implies effort, effort implies virtue. This is why some players resist buffs more than nerfs. Buffs threaten the narrative. They retroactively cheapen prior success. If the character becomes strong, old wins feel different, less heroic, less personal. Downplaying protects history. Upplaying looks like the opposite behavior. It isn't. Where downplaying protects the past, upplaying protects the future. When players exaggerate the strength of opposing characters, they aren't just venting. They're positioning outcomes. If the opponent's character is framed as overtuned, losses feel justified, frustration feels legitimate, calls for nerfs feel reasonable. Upplaying doesn't need to be precise. It needs to be repeatable. Competitive scenes learn quickly that perception influences patches. Outrage moves faster than nuance. Consensus forms before evidence settles. This is where friction emerges. One player downplays their own character, another upplays it. Both are protecting something different, and the conversation stops being about balance. It becomes about whose explanation survives, whose framing feels safer, whose narrative gains authority. Facts don't disappear, they just stop being the point. Beneath both behaviors sits something simpler: blame. Blaming the character after loss is the fastest way to end feedback. It feels analytical, it feels external, it feels complete, and most importantly, it prevents self-interrogation. If the character caused a loss, decisions don't need review. Structure doesn't need questioning. If the character caused a loss, decisions don't need review. Structure doesn't need questioning. Responsibility moves outward. Blame converts uncertainty into certainty, but certainty that arrives too early stops reflection. This distinction collapses constantly. Something being hard does not mean it is unfair. Something being strong does not mean it is unbeatable. Difficulty describes effort, unfairness describes structure. And when those ideas merge, every loss becomes illegitimate. And once losses feel illegitimate, learning quietly shuts down. Because evaluation is hard, players defer. They look to tournament winners, top ranked players, content creators, analysts. This makes sense, but authority does not remove incentive. Experts still have characters to protect, reputations to maintain, narratives to preserve, audiences to satisfy. Expertise does not erase ego, it gives it reach. That doesn't make experts dishonest, it makes them human inside competitive systems. In competition, outcomes retroactively justify narratives. If someone wins, their balance takes feel correct. Their explanations sound credible. Their authority increases. Accuracy becomes secondary to results. This is why questionable balance takes survive for years. They're attached to winners. In competitive scenes, credibility is rarely earned through precision, it's earned through outcomes. Not everyone is manipulating narratives. Some players are genuinely honest about what they believe, and still, they can be wrong. Because competitive truth does not appear all at once, it emerges unevenly, slowly, often after the meta has already settled. Honesty does not guarantee completeness. A character being strong is not the same as a character being visible. Visibility depends on who is willing to play them, where they are played, how refined the strategy is, whether anyone is willing to lose publicly while developing them. Most metas are not maps of potential, they are maps of what has survived tournament pressure. That difference matters. Tournaments select for consistency, low variance, execution under stress, strategies that survive unfamiliar opponents. They do not select for experimental routes, incomplete ideas, high risk structures, characters that require long maturation. So when players say, look at who's winning, that proves what's strong. They aren't wrong, they're mistaking reliability for ceiling. Winning shows what works now, not what could exist with time. Every fighting game has characters that sit in an awkward space. Strong tools, weak documentation, high ceiling, fragile execution, powerful sequences, unclear entry points. These characters don't dominate early metas, not because they're weak, because they demand investment without immediate payoff. And competitive environments punish that. Players don't want to lose learning matches on stream. They don't want to risk tournament runs on hypothesis. They don't want to tie reputation to unfinished ideas, so the character stays bad. Until suddenly it isn't. Then something happens. Someone pieces it together quietly, or a patch removes just enough friction, and overnight, the character becomes obviously broken. Everyone claims it was always known. The narrative reverses instantly. What changed wasn't the character, what changed was confirmation. The meta didn't discover the character, it received permission to believe. This isn't ignorance. Potential is abstract, results are concrete. Potential requires patience and uncertainty tolerance. Results require neither. So communities anchor to what they can see, even when what they see is incomplete. Now the loop closes. Honest players dismiss characters because no one has shown them yet. Down players hide potential to preserve leverage. Up players exaggerate threats to shape patches. All three coexist, and to an outside observer, they look identical. That's why balanced discussions feel unsolvable. They aren't disagreements about strength, they're disagreements about time. What is strong now versus what could be strong eventually. Most players treat the meta like a verdict. It isn't. It's a photograph taken under specific conditions, specific incentives, specific risks, specific players, and specific information. Future metas don't contradict the past. They expose what wasn't visible yet. When scenes only value tournament proof, innovation slows, exploration becomes risky, underdeveloped ideas die early. The game narrows around safety, which makes future shifts more violent when they happen, because nothing was prepared for them. This pattern appears across every fighting game. Different mechanics, different characters, same incentives, risk is punished, certainty is rewarded, narratives follow outcomes. The strongest competitors behave differently. They don't deny character limits, they don't exaggerate opponent strength, they don't anchor losses to tools. They separate what the character allowed, what the situation demanded, what failed to materialize. They don't need explanations to protect identity, so they don't cling to them. When balanced discussions become self-defense, competition loses clarity, not maliciously, not intentionally, gradually. People stop using balance to understand the game and start using it to protect themselves inside it. That's why balanced discussions are never neutral. They are shaped by fear, uncertainty, and identity. Every balance argument hides the same unresolved tension. Where does responsibility live? With the character? With the system? With the player? Most people answer in whichever way hurts least. As long as that remains true, the argument never ends. Because even when the numbers change, the incentives don't. And once you see that, it becomes difficult to unsee. The next time you hear someone speak with certainty about what's broken, listen carefully. Because what's being defended is rarely the character, it's the story. And if the story is what's being protected, what happens when the story can't hold anymore?